Hello. The Divine Code reading for October 16th, pages 261 and 262. We are continuing the introduction to the unit, the Prohibition of Blasphemy. More specifically, the Noahide prohibition of blasphemy derives from an acceptance of the supremacy and sovereignty of God, which ipso facto demands respect or appropriate reverence for God. It follows that 1. Gentiles are subject to the precept of awe and reverence before God, more commonly referred to as the fear of God. Sefer HaChinuch clearly states, this precept applies everywhere, at all times, and to the whole human species. Section 432, that's in the Chinuch. In addition, Kabal, it'd be section 430. Indeed, one may add here that a Gentile ought not only to attain fear of God, but also the love of God. Maimonides writes that the Israelites' commandment to love God, Deuteronomy 6:5, includes also an obligation to call upon all mankind to his service and have faith in him. For if you love somebody, you will praise and extol him and call upon people to love him as well. There is then an implication that all mankind ought to love God. So similarly to the obligation that all mankind has to have reverence and awe, also called the fear of God, there is also the Jewish people have an obligation to call all the nations because of the love that Israel has for God, to call the nations to him, and that the nations should extol upon that they will call upon people to love him as well. So there's an obligation to have fear, that is the reverence and respect for God, and also to have love for God. Number 2, a Gentile is not to use God's name in vain. To use God's name in vain, a Torah prohibition states explicitly for Jews in the 3rd of the 10 Commandments. It is closely allied with the principle of blasphemy. It is clearly a form of disrespect. This would then also include a prohibition to swear falsely. We thus find in the Torah from the earliest times the concept of an oath was regarded as a sacred obligation by Gentiles as well. Examples of this would be in Genesis 21:22 and Genesis 26:28. So doing something in vain means without a purpose, without a clear purpose. To use God's name without a clear purpose is disrespectful. And that's similar to stating an oath. Well, in that case, it would be similar to stating an oath in vain or in a useless manner. If a person swears that, let's say, a water is wet, that would be a useless swearing. So to use God's name in that manner in a pointless manner would be considered disrespectful. Number 3, a Gentile must likewise respect God's creatures, and thus one is not to curse or harm humans, for they are created by God in his likeness and image, as it were. The image of God within mankind is not the form of the human body, God forbid, which would be a false and idolatrous concept, but rather a unique capacity for intellect and speech that is possessed by the human enlivening soul, and its ability to distinguish between good and evil. So there's aspects of the human that is made in the image of God. The inner aspects, the soul of the human has an image of God with it, that's based upon, and therefore we need to respect other humans. That human quality in each other, we need to have respect for that. God created man in his image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. Genesis 1:27. It is reiterated in the Noahide Code in the context of prohibition of murder. Whosoever sheds the blood of man, by man shall his blood be shed. For in the image of God, he made man. That's in Genesis 9:6. Thus it is also said that the Torah's golden rule to love your fellow as yourself. Leviticus 19:18. Rabbi Akiva said, love your fellow as yourself. This is the main principle of the Torah. Ben Azai responded, quoting Genesis 5:1. This is the book of the descendants of Adam. In the day he created man, he made him in the likeness of God. This is an even greater principle. Thus, if you put another human being to shame, no one realize who you put to shame, for he made him in the image of God. As Sifrei on Leviticus 19:18 and Bereshit Rabbah 24:7. Silukutei Sikot, volume 17, page 215. So it's a general principle that because God made man in his own image, therefore it is necessary to respect a fellow human being. And to disrespect that is to disrespect the image of God, and would be connected to blasphemy. Chapter 1, the obligation to respect God's name and what is forbidden as blasphemy. Topic number 1, Gentiles are warned against blessing God's name. This term is euphemistic and means to curse God. So normally, oftentimes when this is talked about, it's the term is used instead of blasphemy. The term is used to bless God's name, which can create some confusion, but that's the way it's usually written down. Because they want to say things in a positive. It's such a difficult thing. The whole concept of blasphemy is such a difficult thing that it's often referred to in the opposite. But obviously, for educational purposes, it has to be explicitly explained. And in the courts, it has to be explicitly explained, even to the point where a witness has to repeat the words that were said. There's a whole way that's done, but that's oftentimes the term blessing God's name is used in the literature to mean actually cursing God's name. and they are liable for this. When the term liability, well, that means the person might die for it, whether it's through a court or through the hand of heaven. In this case, it's referring specifically to a court. And the Lord God commanded upon Adam. Oh, I'm sorry. Adam, the first person, was warned about this, as it says in Genesis 2:16. And the Lord God commanded upon Adam. This means that God commanded his divinity and authority upon Adam. The three meanings of the statement are: first, I am God, do not exchange me. That is for another God, this being the prohibition of idolatry. I am God, do not curse me. This being the prohibition of blasphemy. So both of these are being learned, or actually all three of these are being learned from the statement, I am God. So the first one is the prohibition against idolatry. The second one being the prohibition against blasphemy. And the third one, the fear of me shall be upon you. This being the obligation to fear God. And as we saw in the earlier in the introduction, that is having respect and awe of God, reverence for God. Fearing God is part of the general commandment to guard one's self against committing blasphemy. Tractate Sanhedrin 56b, although the Talmud states there, my fear shall be upon you. This is a commandment to establish dinim, courts of law. It is obvious that this exclamation does not change the simple meaning of the commandment. On the contrary, the main intent of my fear is that one should have fear of heaven, that is, fear of God. The obligation to fear him is further understood to teach about the obligation to fear the courts. So the Talmud gives extra explanations on a lot of things. That still does not change the basic understanding of the text, that the person is to have respect and awe for the court, even though we are also learning from this the necessity, the obligation to respect and have awe for God. And concerning blasphemy, that's cursing God, that's defined as stating that God should harm himself. God forbid. So the basic definition of cursing God, because who would be able to harm God would be God. Therefore, a person that is stating that God should harm himself, that's what's being talked about in the most straightforward. That's the most basic aspect of this prohibition. The prohibition was again commanded explicitly in the Torah regarding Gentiles, as it says in Leviticus 24:15 and 16. Any man, and that was the ish that was spoken of in the introduction. Any man who will blaspheme his God shall bear his sin. And one who pronounces blasphemously God's name shall be put to death. And here it's being explained as by the court, as opposed to being by the hand of heaven. So this is an actual court violation. One who pronounces blasphemously God's name, this source verse is specifically referring to the explicit name of God. which he revealed to the Jewish people when he spoke the 10 Commandments at Mount Sinai. So the name that's being spoken of here, cursing the specific name, is referring to the explicit name, and there's several understandings of the explicit name that's in tomorrow's reading. But that's the object of the curse, would be an explicit name. See Tractate Sanhedrin 56a, any man who will blaspheme. This comes to include Gentiles. So that's learned out in the Gemara, in the Brisa, in Sanhedrin 56a. Thus Moses received and transmitted additional details and clarifications about this no-hide prohibition. And it's when the Torah was given to Moses, that's when it set the laws in a solid manner, and Moses received details about that. And we're going to go into many of the details that have been taught concerning the prohibition of blasphemy as it applies with Gentiles. Thank you.